I am very, very excited to introduce today's speaker, Leslie Forde. Leslie has used research to inform growth and innovation strategy for over 20 years. She's held brand management, product marketing, and business development roles in consumer technology and products, market research, media, and publishing companies. Most recently, she held leadership positions at Houghton, Mifflin Harcourt, Care.com, C-Space, and C-Space. She began her brand management career at Bausch and Lomb and Xerox. Her writing about parenting, motherhood, and equity has appeared in the Washington Post, Slate, Parents Magazine, and her website, Mom's Hierarchy of Needs, among other publications. She's been quoted in CNN, Fast Company, U.S. News and World Report, Her Money, Fairy Godboss, Livingly, and several other outlets. And we're so excited to have her here today. And we're going to drop her last chat and learn that she did with PowerToFly in the chat as well for all of you to check out when we talk about self-care. And then also, I will be moderating today's conversation with Leslie, and I am the Associate Marketing Manager at PowerToFly, and I run our virtual chat and learn community programming. And I am, again, very excited to be here, Leslie. Very excited to see you again and chat. And so wanted to hand the mic over to you first to make sure that I didn't forget anything in that introduction, and if there's anything that you want to add to today's conversation.
That was a beautiful introduction. I'm honored to be here. And I mean, you had me at Elevating Black Women. Like that was, when I saw that, I was like, well, yes, count me in. So I'm thrilled to be part of this discussion. It's an important one, and at a particularly important time, I think, with everything that's happening in the world and in our homes.
Yes, yes. And Leslie, I would love for you to kick us off here talking about Mom's Hierarchy of Needs, why you founded it. You know, I know you've shared your story about burnout, so I would love for you to talk about that a little bit for our audience, so we can bring them up to speed with what your expertise here is in this field.
Sure, I'm happy to share it. You know, at the time, burning out was really awful, and now in hindsight, being able to share the path out and recovery from it has really not only liberated me, but it's allowed me to connect some of this learning with others who are in the midst of it. So I'm grateful that I've had this experience. After my second child was born, so it's now just over 5 years ago, she's in Zoom kindergarten these days, I completely burned out at work. I crashed. I had taken on a huge, kind of set of new responsibilities, a promotion while I was pregnant. Something that, normally I would have been thrilled about, but I was nervous, to be honest with you. And I was assured at the time that, we have your back, everything's going to be great, don't worry about it. And it was literally about 2 weeks before I was due to come back to work that I received a call from my then manager. And he said, that new hire that we were planning, we have to close that rec because we want to, we're trying to demonstrate profitability now. And by the way, your most senior person, she is going into a different division and we cannot backfill her. And within probably 3 months of coming back, I had half of one of my teams, people all had to go out on FMLA leave for completely different reasons. So, I came back to a different job. I was short-staffed. The strategy had changed. We had moved from being focused on top line growth to bottom line profitability. And, I was getting 1 hour, 1.5 hour increments of sleep with a newborn and a toddler. And, I just felt hollowed out. And it was a time in my career where I was kind of being, I think, pulled to bring my most strategic, creative, clear problem-solving self. And I didn't have it in me, right? I was exhausted. And I think, like a lot of us, what I ended up doing was thinking, well, if things are really hard and this isn't going well, the answer must be to just work harder. And I remember I would just be typing away at the keyboard and, I would be trying to shield the co-sleeper with the baby from seeing the glow. And I was up till 1 and 2 and 3 in the morning trying to just get it all done, answer every email, and maintain the level of performance I had before I went out on leave. And it was, of course, a recipe for disaster. It became unsustainable. I became a crazy, tired zombie. A job I once absolutely loved became a job that I couldn't stand anymore. So I took a huge shift. I downshifted. I went to a much larger organization, from having 2 large departments to 1 direct report. I negotiated a 4-day work week. And it took over 2 years to rebuild and kind of recover myself after that. And it was after that recovery where I was having a casual conversation with a dad who was doing some product research into stress. And I ended up doing some advisory work for his company. And he said, "Why are moms so stressed?" I'm like, okay. It's like, okay, how much time do we have to talk about this? So, I said there's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and then there's mom's hierarchy of needs. And as soon as I said it, like I felt something, it clicked, right? I drew down a little piece of paper. I became really curious, like how would other mothers define this? And long story short, what it looks like now, after I had about another 150 moms, comment on it, because research was in my roots. Market research was how I started my career. It's how I solve problems. So I reached out to get input on how other women were doing this. And down at the bottom of the hierarchy, kind of the foundational priorities, are children's milestones, their well-being, their health, their education. Then at the next layer, it's kind of our household responsibilities and roles. Then after that, it's professional responsibilities and role. And way up at the tippy top, right, where almost no one ever gets to, are all the things that we do for our mental, physical, and emotional well-being. That's self-care. And yes, that includes sleep in my pyramid. That's self-interest and learning and growth and healthy relationships with other adults. So the reason, and I didn't realize it, frankly, until I saw it, until I drew it that night, was that the reason we never get up to the top is because everything down at the bottom is never done. So I had to reorient myself to realizing that I was trying to do the impossible. Pre-kids, and even after my first child was born, you kind of condition yourself to think, oh, well, I will, go for that workout or call that friend or see that movie or read that book when everything else is done. But when you realize you're kind of living in the land of never done and overdue, then you have to change how you give yourself permission to use your own time. And I became ruthless, like absolutely ruthless, about carving out space at the top and making sure that I brought self-care back into my world. And it took a while, but that's what restored me. And that's what I preach with mothers and also with caregivers, because I'm often now working with moms and dads and even senior caregivers on the employer side. But it's really critical because we're praised to do all the things that lead to burnout. And we're shamed away from caring for ourselves. And it's part of the trap that women in particular and women of color, perhaps even more so, end up falling into.
Oh, I couldn't agree more, right? And being, of course, that I'm in a position of privilege, right? Like as a white woman, so not having to take on many of these other aspects that come from being a woman of color, a Black woman. But everything that you talk about with burnout, it's glorified to be the mom who can do everything, right? Like we all aspire to what maybe that perfect mom is, or that idea of what a perfect mom is, maybe like the cutout sandwiches and the perfect lunch boxes and doing all these things. And not to say that if that's something that you do, that's wrong. But I think what a lot of women try to aspire to is that, right? And doing it all and saving yourself for last. And then there's this whole other part of mom culture that's like glorifying alcoholism, right? Because it's like, well, how do you deal with all of these things? It leads to mom wine culture and, oh, I had a rough day with the kids, can't wait to drink some wine. And I mean, I definitely enjoy my fair share of wine, but, definitely realizing like how glorified these things are and how toxic it is, right? Trying to do it all, this glorified wine culture, alcohol culture. And, I think also when you talk about permission, like this fact that being a mother, you feel so guilty if you can't do it all, right? So like, I couldn't get to that thing at the end of the day. I couldn't make a homemade meal. I mean, I've definitely had my fair share of weeks where I've eaten more pasta than I'm proud of. I mean, it was good though, right? Because like, who
Right.
doesn't love pasta? But, you know, I have definitely felt like the pressure of being like, oh my gosh, why didn't I do more? So I want to get into this question where we talk about the mom box. What is it? And then how can we escape the mom box, all of these pressures without losing our mom identities, right? Because sometimes it doesn't feel like they go hand in hand. It's like either you're a woman and whatever that means for you, or you're a mom, right? Or you're a caregiver, or you're a woman. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, you described it well, right? With some of the, I know what's been called kind of the Instagram culture, the Pinterest culture, right? When you see these perfect images of mothers who appear, right, in that caption and on screen to be doing it all. And the reality is there is no doing it all, right? It's false. A lot of us were raised believing that it was possible, right? We were kind of sold what I call the have it all fantasy, right? And so it's incredibly disappointing and disillusioning when you realize that being the mother you thought you would be, being the partner you thought you would be, being the parent, the child of aging parents that you imagined that you would be, being the worker that you thought you would be, that there's trade-offs that need to be made to fit all of them together. And it's extremely kind of destabilizing, right, to our identities. So I think this box is this kind of do it all, have it all box where there's this perception that, mothers and women are what I call kind of the three P's of motherhood, hyper productive, people pleasing, and perfectionistic, right? And these are all things that damage us as individuals. And to your point about mom identity, right? Whatever it was that kind of held you up and allowed you to kind of feel some structure in yourself, a lot of that starts to get like, it gets shaken a little bit as you become a parent. You're suddenly out of your comfort zone, depending on the age and independence and health of your kids, you might be called upon to do things that you never planned on doing, right? So all of that is really destabilizing. And then on top of it, if society is telling you, well, the mom job is this is what you should be doing. This is what you should value. This is how you should spend your time. And no, don't worry about sleep or caring for yourself. You should be doing everything in service to your loving family right now, right? Like that, those are the messages that are harmful, that kind of fit so many mothers into this space where they feel like they have to escape it with substances or with, any number of things to just, deal with the incredible pressure that is placed upon us, and unrealistic expectations are at the heart of it.
You just drove so many points home. And I know when I became a mom, okay, like I had a terrible pregnancy, which was totally not what I expected, right? Because you see these images of like women glowing, and I was like, okay, I am not glowing. Like I had hyperemesis, I had a bunch of other issues, and I was like, this is not what I expected, nor what I signed up for. And so I was not enjoying it. Then you get into motherhood, you're thrown into that, and it's like, wow, okay, this definitely isn't what I expected. Like, I know at first I dealt with like a lot of postpartum depression, a lot of postpartum anxiety. I remember when I had my son, like it felt like there was just cinder blocks like on my chest when I would try to leave the house. And this isn't something we talk about. And actually, these are things that we try to shy away from, right? And the same goes for fertility issues and all that, without diving too much into that topic. But it's such a disservice to women because we make parenthood and motherhood especially seem like it's the best thing in the world, and it can be. And that is not to say that it is not the thing that fills people's cups, but I think it is a disservice for people who feel those three P's and they feel like they have to fit into those three P's, and they can't. And that is so suffocating and so exhausting. So thank you for talking about that, Leslie. And
Very welcome.
So we had a question that came in through the chat that I wanted to make sure that we got to, as well as some of these other pre-submitted questions that we had. But can you give some more detailed symptoms of burnout? What did it look like for you? And what were your thoughts and feelings as you were going through that?
That's a great question. And I will say that it varies by person. And, I've interviewed so many amazing experts who are psychiatrists and psychologists and doctors, and I've talked about this issue and I've researched this issue. But, from a lay person's perspective, it's like a loss of motivation, right? A loss of enjoyment of things that you used to enjoy, a loss of feeling, at least for me, how it felt at the time was that all of these things that I held dear and had kind of set myself up to believe were like the end result in the arc of happiness. Like, oh, well, when I get my family completed and when I have my kids and when I'm in this career that I love, then that's going to be, the point where I can, take a breath and like savor. But no, it's nothing like that, right? You're being pulled in a million directions. And to the points that you made earlier, often undiscussed, right? There's a lot of physical recovery from becoming a parent, becoming a mother, and going through that process physically and emotionally is not trivial. So I found myself feeling like I was trapped. I felt like I was trapped in my own life, even though my life looked on the surface like everything I had wanted, right? I love my children dearly, and I worked hard. Speaking of fertility, I worked really hard to become a mother. It was not easy. And I put all of these little blocks in place. And when the house kind of was built from them, I looked at it and realized, well, I don't feel good. This doesn't feel good. I don't feel happy. I feel stressed. I feel anxious. I feel like no matter how much work I do, which is considerable. And I was that kind of person pre-kids where I didn't even need a lot of sleep, right? I mean, I can work at high levels. I've always had that type of capacity, but I felt exhausted, right? It felt like even my best wasn't enough. And I felt really distraught by that. So it changed my self-confidence and my perception of my own competency, which is a very damaging thing, right? It's damaging in your personal life, it's damaging in your professional life. And it took me a while to realize that, I'd been sold a bill of goods, and a lot of us had, right? Because we're trying to do what our mothers and our grandmothers did and what we've seen them do and appear to be doing successfully, but doing it in the context of a work culture where there are no rests, right? There are no breaks. Work has expanded, and there's so many great studies about this, but the amount of hours we spend working has expanded. The amount of hours we spend with our kids, parenting for mothers, has expanded. And the amount of leisure time that the average mother has is tiny, right? So all of that is just like the perfect storm for burnout and the perfect storm for exhaustion. And because in our culture, overwork is so glamorized, it's hard to realize that you should be upset and you should be wanting more for yourself, because it's kind of painted as what perfection is supposed to look like.
Uh, as you're saying them, laughing internally, because you had to have seen that like tweet or that meme where it's talking about a mom and she's like, all right, I got 5 minutes to do something. Am I going to fold the laundry? Am I going to wash the dishes? Am I going to do this? Am I going to do that? And then she didn't end up doing anything because she's like, oh, well, I'm tired. And it's just so, oh yeah. And it's so reassuring talking to you, Leslie, because, hearing you say all these things, I think part of the problem is not putting visibility to a lot of these things, right? Because I was so shocked when I came into motherhood. And if I'm feeling this way, how many other women or parents are feeling this way? And let's not, even talking about caregivers, right? Because at that point, you're taking care of your aging parents, it can feel like, I don't want to say unnatural, but it can feel really difficult to come to those emotions, right? Because they were always taking care of you, and now you're in a position where you have to take care of your parents in whatever capacity that might look like, or elderly family members. And so, talking about this, and especially tying this into the pandemic, right? Because this has brought on this new age of expanded work, maybe less work-life balance, although it should feel like maybe we should have more because we're working from home, right? How have you kind of used the lesson and the blessing in disguise that was that burnout to bring wellness and self-care to the pandemic? And what advice do you have for other people who may be feeling the same?
Oh, yeah, that's such a good question. So there's a few things in there. And I'll take the latter part first in terms of what I bring to others and what I describe to others. Some of the most impactful research that I did early on, and one of my earliest studies, was the mental load and how that affected mothers. And it was just this incredible opening for me when I started doing that research around some of the neuroscience behind stress, that, we're kind of pushing our brains to do things that our brains weren't meant to do. And it feels bad. So, your working memory is like a bookshelf that fits 7 books. And we're trying to cram 70 books onto it, right? But it only fits 7. And it feels bad. So I explain to people that in this time where every single thing requires more cognitive processing, it's like your kids in school Tuesdays and Thursdays. Oh no, sorry, there's been a COVID exposure. Your kid's not in school for the next 14 days. Or, well, we're going to now shut down on Wednesdays. Oh, we're going to shut down on Wednesdays at noon. Oh, we're going to have lunch service. No, we're not going to have lunch service. The daycare is open. The daycare is closed. The grocery store is open. The grocery store is closed. Toilet paper, no toilet paper, right? All that stuff is it's draining. And it's like a workout for your mind, because all of these things, getting to work, getting kids to school, navigating your expertise in your industry, whatever industry you're in, all of that pre-pandemic, you would set up a lot of long-term memory for, you had a lot of cognitive shortcuts. It didn't cost you a lot of energy to think about these things. But now we're kind of assaulted with reinventing how we do all of these normal daily life things, in addition to navigating what is likely probably the most kind of mass time of strategic change in any industry that you happen to work in, which also requires, of course, a lot of cognitive energy. So I just remind people that's what's going on, and it doesn't feel great. So you have to kind of protect your mental energy and set boundaries, not just for your time, but for the things that you are responsible for thinking about and doing. And that means inside your home and outside of your home. In terms of my own personal lessons, I think at points in this pandemic where I felt like I could start to feel myself getting burned out or feel myself getting exhausted, I've learned, instead of doubling down on working harder, which is my instinct because I was, raised and socialized to believe that was the answer, I've been giving myself more time. So I run in the mornings, which is an amazing reset for me every day. I do it outside, regardless of the weather. And on the days where I feel really exhausted, I'll try to get another walk in, like a short walk just to get fresh air. I've started getting very, rigid is the wrong word. Maybe it's the right word. Rigid about bedtime and going to sleep at a reasonable time. I had a pretty good nighttime routine, and then it just the pandemic just blew it up. Suddenly I found myself, just because of all the extra work, compensating for that by trying to stay up later and later and later. And it was having a lot of negative effects. So reining that back in, making some time that's very protected kid time. It used to be that my kids were used to having 100% of my attention when they saw me, because I would step through the door after I got off the train, and I would just put my phone away and not pick up my computer or phone until bedtime. So they were used to, mommy's home, then we have her, right? But now that I work from home and they school from home and my husband's here, it's like they're now seeing me on my computer and they're seeing me taking calls, and they don't really understand that they don't have the same access to me, right, during the workday. So that's been like a resetting and a reconditioning all that stuff. It's a long answer to your question.
No. But I mean, it's awesome because I think, when we talk about self-care and wellness, obviously not everything is going to work for everyone. For example, I can't run. I love the idea of running, but like my knees start to hurt. So I can't enjoy that. And I secretly get a little bit jealous. Well, I guess it's not a secret anymore because I think running is so cool. And I think it's like such a great way to burn off energy, but unfortunately I can't. So I try to walk really fast to like burn that energy. But thank you, because I think it really is so important to provide different ideas and everything around self-care. And so, in these last few minutes, Leslie, I would love for you to tell us, where we can keep up with you, where we can follow you, where we can support you, but also beyond that, a piece of advice that you might have for somebody who's tuning in today.
Absolutely. Mom's Hierarchy of Needs.com. And there's varying permutations of Mom's Hierarchy or Mom's Hierarchy of Needs on all the social channels. So I'm in all those places and would love for people to connect with me and follow me there. The advice that I give, and now especially because this is an Elevating Black Women conference, protecting mental energy and protecting energy is just as important as protecting physical energy and protecting your family. We all lived through last summer and the events of last summer and last spring, and with the events in the news right now and a certain very infamous trial that's taking place right now, like that's triggering for a lot of people of color. It's triggering for Black and brown women. There's, an extreme uptick in, hate and racism toward Asian people as well. All of those things are swirling. So I encourage people, and this is what I do for myself, like limit your intake, right? I've interviewed some amazing psychiatrists, like limit your intake of the news. Racism is a form of trauma. So everything that's happening right now and that you're seeing, if you kind of take it all in and keep taking it in, you will start to feel it in your body in negative ways. So I encourage everyone who is listening to kind of protect your mental energy. Self-care doesn't have to be a run. Self-care can be splashing some cold water on your face. It can be taking 3 minutes to do some deep breathing. It can be shutting the bathroom door and giving yourself a moment alone, right? Whatever it is that is good for you, do it and do it without apology and do it without feeling, any sense of guilt, like you deserve it.
And if you have young children, you may have to lock the bathroom door when you get in there. Shutting it may just not be enough. But Leslie, I want to thank you so much for being here today. I have always admired the way that you speak, in the sense that like you just ooze calmness. And I imagine that it comes from all of these experiences with burnout, but just the way that like listening to you talk, I just already feel better. And I feel like that was part of my self-care for the day. So I might just have to come back and listen to this talk afterwards, because your voice is so calming. So thank you so much for being here and sharing that insight. And I highly, highly encourage everyone to go check out Mom's Hierarchy of Needs and follow up with Leslie.